We're right in the middle of the sugya of yain nesech, of wine which we can't use because it either belongs to a non-Jewish person or it's been handled by a non-Jewish person. And we call that yain nesech or stam yainam. Tosfos makes it clear back on Daf Chavtes that when we talk in the sugya, in the Mishnah already on Daf Chavtes, about the prohibition of wine, even the isur hana, the fact that you can't get benefit from it, not only can't you drink it, we're talking about stam yenam. We're not talking about wine which has actually been used for idolatrous purposes. That's not special about wine. Even water that's used for idolatrous purposes also, there's nothing special about wine in that capacity. What's unique about wine is that even if it hasn't been used for idolatry purposes, but it has been handled by somebody who isn't Jewish or belongs to somebody who isn't Jewish, it becomes forbidden in a similar way to wine which has actually been used for idolatrous purposes. And we need to understand why. Interestingly, there are two areas of life where community plays a critical role. The one is in society, just in society, the way societies function. And the other is in worship. That all the major religions worship in community. We have minyanim, we have people get together and they daven as a community. They pray to God as a community. And wine bridges those two communal activities. Wine is something that is used to bring society together when they're having a good time, and wine is used as a form of service. So wine has a particular status in these halachas. Avodah Zarah Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Bet, beer and wine, mipnei asu shechar shelakum. The question now becomes, what about other forms of alcohol? Is it just wine? What about other forms of alcohol? And we know that it's not only just wine. We know from the sugya that it's also pat akum, that bread which has been manufactured by a non-Jewish person has a status of generally not being something that we should use. They did a gzeira on oil as well at that time. And our Mishnah says, Elu dvarim shelovdei kochavim asurin ve'isuran isur hana'ah. These are the things that if they belong to a non-Jew, they are forbidden, and it's even to have benefit from them is forbidden. The first one on the list is yain, wine, and we bring the Tosfos where Tosfos explains that the Chachomim gave stam yainam, wine which is owned or handled by a non-Jew, the din of yain nesech, to treat it the same way as wine which has been used for religious purposes of another religion. What's interesting is the overlap between the social and the worship aspects of wine, and we're going to come to that on Daf Lamed Vav, but it's important for our understanding, where Rav has a memra, Kulan mishum avodas kochavim gazru b'hem. The end of the day, all these prohibitions, the underlying principle is avodah zarah, is idol worship. The through various iterations, al pitan ushmanan mishum yenam. The Chachomim, the rabbis, forbade bread and oil that belongs to a non-Jew because of wine. Ve'al yeno mishum benoteihem, and wine to prevent intermarriage. If you're not allowed to drink, you can't go to parties, you can't drink in non-Jewish society. That helps to avoid intermarriage. Val benoteihem, and why is intermarriage so serious? And it's serious, as the Gemara says, in its own rights there. Prohibitions about that as well, but there's another problem with intermarriage, and that is mishum davar acher, because it brings to avodah zarah. And that's a really important principle to understand, because as I said in the opening shir to Masechta Avodah Zarah is the lo ta'aseh of emunah. We have a mitzvah of emunah, we've got to believe in Hashem. That's the positive mitzvah. The negative mitzvah is you can't believe in anybody other than Hashem. That's the second of the 10 commandments. And the first and the second of the 10 commandments are a couplet. They work together. The lo yeh lecha elakim acherim al panai, you shall have no other God on my face or in front of me, doesn't mean that you replace me with other gods. It means even in addition to me. To think, and we discussed in the Psicha to Avodah Zarah, that Avodah Zarah is believing in any force other than God. And when you understand clearly what that means, you realize we're all involved in Avodah Zarah all the time. When we think that it's the doctors that cure us, that's Avodah Zarah. The doctors are the vehicle for God's curing. And that little shift in perspective is an Avodah Zarah problem. You believe that poverty is caused because the markets went down, or wealth is caused because the markets went up. That's Avodah Zarah. That's believing in forces separate from Hashem. Those are all vehicles. the vehicle that Hashem uses for bringing the well-being, the financial well-being of individuals and of societies up and down are the markets. And it's matters of health and medicine that Hashem uses as the vehicle to deal with our matters of health. But at the end, we need to appreciate and understand, Ein od milvado, there is no other force in the world other than the force of the Ribono Shel Olam. And if we involve ourselves with other forces, as we tend to do all the time, we talk about the war and who won and why it was won and how it was won and what could have been done and what should have been done and if only this and as if God isn't in the picture. We could have done it differently and then everything would have been good. Or we did it brilliantly, that's why everything was good. These are just vehicles, these are just tools. We've got to make sure that our lens of reality is a lens of the Ribono Shel Olam. We look at the world through God and not through any other lens. When we don't, we're so to say diluting God's presence in the world. It's a matter of dilution. It's not that you're eliminating Hashem. The lo yeh lecha elokim acherim al panai is don't dilute me. There is nothing but me. I'm concentrated. There is no force but Hashem. Don't start introducing other forces into the world because you dilute me. And another form of dilution is dilution of the nation through intermarriage. So we're looking, Avodah Zarah is dilution of Hashem's presence, and intermarriage is dilution of Am Yisrael, of the presence of the Jewish people. And they're interlinked, because once you start diluting the people, and you've got other viewpoints, and you've got other lenses which are brought into society, we start looking through those lenses, and it affects the Avodah Zarah element of the way we interpret the world, of the way we understand and the way we appreciate the world. And so the Gemara says on Daf Lamed Vav, the reason you can't have wine is because of becoming too close to non-Jewish society and ultimately intermarrying. And that brings to Avodah Zarah. Then there are no barriers at all. And we start adopting the way of looking at the world, secular ways of looking at the world, liberal ways of looking at the world, non-Torah ways of looking in the world. We start adopting that. That starts becoming normal because we've changed our norm. And keeping the Jewish society Jewish, which doesn't just mean genetically Jewish, it means hashkafically Jewish as well, and halachically Jewish as well. Doing that enables us to retain that concentration of Jewishness in our nation. There needs to be Jewishness in our worship, which means Ein od milvado, there is no God other than Hashem, and there needs to be Jewishness in our nation, which means there is nobody other among the Jewish people. The nation is Jewish and operates that way. So that linkage between wine and wine being that linkage between the social. So yes, the reason, as Tosfos says on Daf Chavtes, the primary reason for not drinking wine that is being handled or owned by a non-Jew is to reduce the chances of intermarriage. That's the real reason. But the reason that we're concerned about intermarriage in this context is that it leads to a dilution of our service of Hashem. Gemara in our Daf and Daf Lamed Aleph starts, mipnei ma asru shechal shel avdei kachavim. What about beer? What about alcohol that is not grape-based? They don't use beer in church services. We don't use beer in shul services. We didn't use beer in the Beis Hamikdash. So what about beer? It has no religious component. It's just social. What is the situation with beer? Answers the Gemara, beer is also a problem, mishum chatnus, and the reason is because of intermarriage, and the Gemara brings a story with Rav Papa and Rav Achai, who both only drank beer that wasn't Jewish, it was made or handled by a non-Jew, when they were out in the street already. They weren't in the bar or in the home of the non-Jew, or in their own home. But mishum chatnus Rav Achai avid achoka yetera, they both consider the prohibition of drinking other forms of alcohol in non-Jewish company as a prohibition of chatnut, all part of discouraging social intimacy across the boundary of Jewishness. So there seems to be a linkage that we do take this principle of chatnut beyond wine, and we take it into the areas of other alcohol. What's interesting is Tosfos brings, and it's based on a Sefer HaTrumas, which I bring in. The reason I actually brought the photostat of the Sefer HaTrumas is that's an old version of the Sefer HaTrumas. Back 500 years ago, it was printed. And there's a lot of discussion about the actual version and the wording of the Sefer HaTrumas. But without getting into a whole lot of detail right now, Tosfos and the Ritvo and the Sefer HaTruma all make it clear that this law of other forms of alcohol, such as beer, only applies when it brings to regilut, because the lo asru mishum chatnut ela likvoa shtiya bechanut or beregilut lishtot beveit ha'ovdei kochavim. It's not that you can never have beer that's handled by a non-Jew. It's different from wine. It's just you can't have it in certain situations. You can't have a fixed drinking arrangement with a non-Jewish person. You get together for drinks every Wednesday evening or whatever. That we can't do. Or in the home of the non-Jew. But if you're having a drink, you're meeting somebody, you're having a business meeting, you have a drink together, not a problem. That's not where the issue is. Which makes it very difficult. If the prohibition of beer, of other forms of alcohol, is similar to wine in that it's also because of chatnut. It's also because of intermarriage. Why do we find latitude in the case of beer that we don't find in the case of wine? And we know today people are not very makpid about other forms of alcohol, but we see from the halacha, and it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, and not to make fixed arrangements of partying and drinking alcohol in that particular situation. The Ran wants to suggest that the reason that we take it lighter when it comes to beer is because our Tosfos on Daf Lamed Aleph says, Lo matzinu lo b'mishnah v'lo b'vraisa. This law that you can't have other forms of alcohol with non-Jewish people, we don't find in the Mishnah and the Brisa. It was a later law that was introduced in the time of the Gemara, in the time of the Amoraim. Therefore, says the Ran, there's latitude. We can be more flexible with beer than we can with other forms of drink. One reason could be because bread is something that everybody needs, so they're more strict with bread. And also because bread is made by women, certainly in those days, and it would bring to more fraternization than other forms, and therefore they were more particular, even not only about wine, but also about bread, than they are about beer, which is the least severe of all the cases. And the Shulchan Aruch brings that halacha. But I want to suggest that if we learn Rashi carefully, we'll understand the difference between wine and beer with an amazing insight that is important for us to grasp. And that is, Rashi says on Daf Lamed Vav, where we talk about the fact that everything is to avoid intermarriage, and intermarriage is to avoid dilution of worship, that we start worshipping other forces other than the Ribono Shel Olam. Says Rashi, Mishum Yeinam, shehayayin bo'er bo u'mevio lidei benotehen. Because the wine burns inside you. It reduces inhibitions, and it brings about a readiness for intimacy. So wine is a form, it's much more than just regular alcohol. It actually puts a person in a frame of mind where the barriers of inhibition are reduced and intimacy is encouraged. And there's a reason why wine is something that is used in that particular purpose. That means the problem is in the wine. Different from our Gemara, Mishum Chatnus, where our Gemara says you can't have beer because of Chatnus, because of intermarriage. Rashi doesn't say Shehasheichar bo'er bo u'mevia lidei benotehem. Rashi doesn't say that. What does Rashi say? Shelo yargil la'asot mishtaot etzel oved kochavim. So that you won't become accustomed to party in non-Jewish society. And then you'll see a beautiful young Jewish girl, and you'll want to marry her or have her for your son, and then we get into trouble. So notice the differences. In the case of wine, Rashi says the problem is the wine. It's the chemistry of the wine is the problem. And what the wine does to your physiology, that's the problem. There's a chemical problem with wine. With beer, it's a behavioral thing. You don't want to do things which cause a hergel of coming together. So they're treated very, very differently. And we need to understand that both of these things apply. That on the one hand, there's such a din as yayin nesech. There's the questions of pat akum, where the problem is the wine itself. The object of the wine, the hefza of the wine is a problem. And therefore, if the wine was handled by a non-Jew and sold to a Jew, now it's your wine, and you're drinking it in your house, you can't do that. Why not? There's no intermarriage. Shabbos, you're making kiddush on a good bottle of French wine. What is the problem? It wasn't used for idolatry. It was handled by a goy, but it doesn't belong to a non-Jew. It belongs to you. There are no non-Jews around. There are no pretty young ladies who aren't Jewish around. It's just you on your own. You're sitting alone in your house, not even your family. You're sitting on your own. You still can't do it because the problem's in the wine. We've got to look at wine and understand the power of wine, what wine is. That wine is mekarev us to the Rebbeinu Shem. Wine creates intimacy with God, and wine creates intimacy with other people. That's what wine does. It's different from other forms of alcohol. That's the nature of wine. Sheikhar is a different thing. Then there's a different law altogether. And that is with sheikhar, with beer. If it's your beer, you can have it in your house. You can even have it in situations in a non-Jewish house or with a non-Jew. Or when you're in a hotel, this Tosfos says, if the innkeeper offers you a glass of wine and you don't want to offend him, or a glass of beer and you don't want to offend him, you have the glass of beer. So here the problem is not in the alcohol, not in the substance. Here the problem is in the behavior. That we should just cut down the extent to which we party without inhibition in non-Jewish society, that we keep a certain distance, a certain barrier, and that we know that is. Look how subtle the halakha is when it comes to understanding. We would think that it's the same issue. You're not allowed to have wine, you're not allowed to have any alcohol. No, wine is one thing and other forms of alcohol are different. They're used for different purposes and they're intended for different purposes, and we need to be sensitive to that when we're doing that. And it's interesting that you could be in a casual situation where you are at a party, you are at a cocktail event, and they're handing out drinks. It's a one-off. It's not something you do regularly. So you can have a vodka or a scotch or a glass of beer. Why can you do that? Because your mind is in halacha. Your mind is going through and saying, can I have this? Can't I have this? Is this wine or is this non-wine? What is the reason? Your mind is in halakha, and that's what Chazal wants. That when you're socializing, your mind is not on the social aspect only, your mind is also on the halachic aspect. And it's sufficient to just know that there are certain gedorim, there are certain halachot. When it comes to wine, it's not just the behavior that is also, it's the actual object of the wine itself. It's the chemical composition of the wine. It's what wine is used to. Wine is in a completely different category. And that's why the halachot of wine that is being handled by a non-Jew are so meticulous and so serious, and why we're makpid, why we're so careful about those halachot.